future trends, deep insights, industry leaders. This is the iGaming Next podcast with your host, Pierre Lindh.
Neal, how's it going?
Good afternoon. Yeah, good, thank you. You?
Good afternoon. I'm very well, thank you as well, Neal. We've been sitting here together now for the last half hour, just having an absolutely wonderful conversation. And I don't think that it was recorded, but I really hope it was actually. Now we're looking back, because it was really interesting to sit down and just have a little pre-conversation with you here before the podcast started. But nonetheless, Neal, you're the CTO of iSoftBet. You come a little bit from outside of the industry. You've been now with our industry for the last year or so. What did you start by introducing yourself a little bit and your background, where you come from, and so on?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, name's Neal, CTO at iSoftBet. So I guess my background is I've been in technology for 20 years now, working my way through various different roles, from help desk through to getting my hands dirty in data centers, through to then running teams and thinking quite deeply about what it is that makes tech really work for a business. And so I kind of worked in a business for just under 10 years, and I decided that after, I didn't want my 10-year reward. Nothing wrong with B&Q vouchers, but I felt that it was time for me to move into different industries. So I kind of moved into a public sector, and then I've done a few different roles in public sector, and then I moved back into private sector, looking at FinTech for some smaller organizations, and then moved into another organization that was looking to float on the stock exchange. So I've been through 2 IPOs in my career, based in the UK, gone through that process, which is always quite interesting. And then I ended up in iGaming. And again, I think the key for me is just to be in many different industries and then try and apply technology to any industry that I can, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, coming from a full career outside of gaming and then jumping into our industry, like, what were your impressions of the industry? Did it take some time to kind of get your mind around how the industry works, and how do you compare it to previous industry that you've been working in?
I don't think I've fully got my head around exactly how the industry works, but then that's probably more of I really like to intrinsically understand stuff. But I think I understand it well enough now to kind of see how it operates. And I think the key for me is that you're in an organization that's looking to grow, looking to transform, and has a certain degree of scale. And I think once you are in a business that can transform and has scale, then you can really apply tech properly to it. So I don't know whether that makes sense, but ultimately you get the ability to, let me I guess apply a different example in that when you're in a business with scale, then you actually have to optimize what you do. So it's easy just to go into a business and do something that's functional, but then the real skill comes in when it needs to be functional and perform.
That makes sense. Yes, as a newcomer to this industry, and coming in as the CTO, I mean, this must be an absolute joy to work in this industry, considering how close, like how much data is being captured, like recognizing patterns in the industry. There's so much data points to get to know your customer and to kind of deliver these unique experiences, and that is kind of a little bit what the operators want in the end of the day, and you as an aggregator want to understand the customers on an individual basis. Is that that's fair to say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can take standard metrics that are in the industry now, and you can look at what Amazon and Netflix do for the recommendation engine, and you can use the marketing analysis where you want to understand the lifetime value of a customer, and there's various ways that you can bring in these complex data structures to understand that. And I think the again, one of the key successes is try and keep that really simple. And for me, it's about customer segmentation. It's looking at how do you understand a customer that interacts with your game either for a very small amount of time versus playing for a longer period of time. Someone who likes to have more skin in the game, if you like, to put their money on the line for the excitement of what they could potentially win. Then I think that's really interesting, and that's where I want to build a platform that enables us to understand that and then to apply those models and then look at running in a digital twin way, which I think is where the really interesting tech answers can come out of.
Yeah, super fascinating stuff. I mean, I'm really excited to dig into that in general. We're going to come to that as well, the digital twin, a bit later in the conversation. But I wanted to kind of start off a little bit today with, iSoftBet just released its white paper that you co-wrote as well,
yes,
which is basically a 6-7 page document outlining the future of iSoftBet, obviously, and how you view the future of tech in the industry. Can you just talk a little bit? What's the general ethos and thoughts behind this white paper? And can you just explain a little bit what it contains in general?
Yeah, so the white paper really covers off what it is that we're looking to achieve. So if we take a bit of a step back, then say I've been in the industry now for just about 9 months, and the position that we're in as a business is we're looking to get to that next level of scale. So I'm trying to bring in that new way of thinking and that bring it back to the first principles that we've kind of touched upon before. So the white paper is there really just to kind of explore how we build a technology platform. And I think that what we're going to see now is lots of consolidation within industry. And I think it's important that we as a collective are sharing ideas and bringing them all together. And ultimately what we should be doing is bringing it out for the benefit of the player, the people who enjoy the games that we produce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such an interesting, super well put together white paper in general, and I think you can find it on iSoftBet.com. I saw you guys published it.
Yes.
Now I've read it like 4 times, this white paper, because I just thought it was so well put together, and I'm really interested in general in kind of where the industry is going, where the trends are, and how different industry leaders are seeing the future. I think it's an important question. And one thing that you guys raised in the synopsis of the white paper is the fact that there's a feeling that the iGaming industry really needs to kind of speed up its efforts a bit on the technology front, that other industries are perhaps accelerating a bit quicker than the iGaming industry. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that, and expand a little bit more on where the iGaming industry is lagging behind?
Yeah, so I think it's the know your customer, understand how people are interacting with your systems, which is really key, and how they're interacting with your games. Again, that segmentation piece. And I think it's the amount of information that we can get from, and it's the IOB, as we term it in the paper, the Internet of Behavior. Then it's to bring all of that information together and find the customer segmentation, as well as then merging it with other pieces of data, which might be the happiness index, or it could be the location, it could be the weather, it could be all these kinds of things. And you'll actually find that there's something unique that hasn't been discovered before. And I think that's the exciting thing. So it's bringing all of those data points together. And one of the key things that we're looking to do is to produce an aggregation platform that becomes really transparent.
Yeah.
And that's probably the core premise of the strategy that we have. And, I've made the point that we need to be thinking longer term than our competitors. So a lot of people work on a 3-year schedule, financial cycle because of accounting purposes, or if you're in the public sector, then you operate on a 4-year term because of elections, based in the UK, that is. And then some businesses then operate on a 5-year term. Again, there's some kind of accountancy reason behind that, but I think 7 years is something which really enables us to build something unique and something really different. And that puts us in the top 1% of businesses when we're thinking in that longer term approach. And So the aggregation platform itself should be there as being very simple, whereas at the moment an aggregation platform was quite unique 10 years ago. Now it's really just, if we pare it back, then it's 3 or 4 core functions, and we can use external products. We can use external services, whether it be SaaS or whether it be open APIs, in order to be able to drive that now. So the value comes in how we integrate those open source products together. And then that enables us as a business to focus on what humans need to do, or people need to do. And that's where I think as a business you drive that value by driving the efficiency. Tech becomes transparent, and then people can do the creative things and come up with the ideas, and that's where we can get the people to look at the data, the internet of behavior, bring it all together and look at creative ways of using things like spin time, when they visit, what time of the day they visit. We can probably intonate whether they're night owls or whether they're doing it for half an hour on lunch break, whether they're shift workers and they're doing it at 3 o'clock in the morning. Then all of these things, we can bring in, and we can perhaps understand, what would drive their engagement and what's right for that particular player and individual as well.
Yeah, interesting. So kind of what you're saying is like, X amount of years ago, a game aggregator was great because you have kind of a turnkey solution. It's easy to plug in and you get access to all this content. But now it's become a bit commoditized, the aggregation model itself. And what you want is kind of like the aggregation model is there, but what you can contribute with is like all this rich like data and APIs and plugins, and that is where kind of you as iSoftBet see that this is heading, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you look at an aggregation platform, then there's very few pieces of information, spin time, bet value, that you can obtain, but the metadata about when they happen and how often they happen is what's really interesting. So that bringing that data together, I think, is where there's going to be value creation.
Absolutely.
And then if we tie that into producing the digital twin, so we produce this data warehouse, and then we have a digital twin concept, which means that we can replay how people interact with our games, and we can see if we were to change a particular parameter, whether it's a RTP or whether it's a spin time, then I think that's how we understand the impact that has on the player. Now, one of the key points here is that you can spend a lot of time optimizing a product and, let's say, reducing latency because you think that's what people want. But below a certain threshold, people cannot comprehend faster latency. So, but then there is the flip side to that, where it may be that absolutely they can. And it's like people who talk about vinyl, that there's vinyl just sounds different, but it hasn't got, it's got that when you're playing it. The people who are old enough to have vinyl, that is, but it has a warmth to it, and I think that's what we'll obtain.
I like that analogy, going back to basics.
Yes.
So I'm interested as well, Neal. I mean, we've talked a lot about like first principle thinking as a way to kind of break down, first of all, what is the business model of an organization, and then kind of build a strategy around first principle thinking. Like, can you explain a bit more? What does first principle thinking mean to you, and how has this kind of influenced the white paper that you put together?
So because I've come outside of the industry, then I really wanted to take a good look at what iGaming is. And so first principles for me is taking something which appears very complicated and really breaking it down into the 3 or 4 core elements to an aggregation platform or games, and that's what I'm working to kind of obtain, and I've kind of built a bit of a model internally that we use, which is part of my strategy that I have, and we're really starting to look at, we've got this aggregation platform, we've got games, you've got gamification, but again, the number of data points that you have, the unique data points that you have for a player is actually quite small, but the number of players you have is huge. So then the number of transactions that you have is also huge. So it's exponential again. Then it's how do we build a platform which is extensible, again, making it incredibly simple. So it's easy to make something complicated. It's really hard to make something simple. And that's the key that I want to be able to do, is to get it so it's really simple. And the white paper itself is to bring that together. And I think the key concepts that we have is that we're going to collect that data, which is the Internet of Behaviors. Then we use that data into AI and machine learning, which then we apply into our digital twin, which then enables us to really understand behaviors and start to tweak things like gamification and maths models, so that we give the players the best experience. And that's where I think that we'll win, and operators will value the information that we have and can see how to enhance things for the player as well.
Yeah, I think it's such a good exercise for any organization to kind of build their strategy around first principle thinking. And we talked before here, a great example of our dear idol, let's say, Elon Musk, who built Tesla, and just his ethos in general. He built that around first principle thinking, which is the fact that okay, let's break down SpaceX. Okay, we are not we don't live in a sustainable way on this planet. Therefore, if humanity is going to survive, we have to eventually leave the planet. We have to leave the planet for Mars, and therefore SpaceX has a use case. Let's say that's the first principle thinking and the first principle thinking of Tesla was broken down in his business model in the way where he said, we have X amount of money. It's not that much money, but we're gonna use this money to build an expensive car for the ultra rich. Okay, then we're gonna sell those cars. We're gonna take that money that we made, and we are going to make a car that is targeting the rich, not the ultra rich, but the rich. And we're gonna make some more cars basically than in the first phase. Then we're gonna sell those cars, and we're gonna take the money that we created here again, and we're gonna go into phase 3, which is the mass market car. So it's phase 1, like a limited amount of cars for the ultra rich. Phase 2. A bit more cars for the like medium rich, let's say, and phase 3 we're gonna go to mass market, and that's exactly what he ended up doing with Tesla, and that's the foundation of the entire company, that is built on first principle thinking like that. I think it's just such a healthy way to approach what is the purpose of your organization in the end of the day.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and I think to a certain degree, as a business grows. In the same way with iSoftBet, then we've grown to a point where we're doing billions of transactions, and we want to get to the point where we can do tens of billions. Then it's about how do we take what we have today, and we have this fantastic opportunity to invest in a new platform that I think if we pair it back to first principles thinking, do it in a really efficient way, and then we focus on the games and we focus on the data that we obtain, then that's how we drive efficiency, and we use automation to be able to do that. And then we apply our people, which, let's face it, that's the one of the primary expenses of business is people, to what they can do best. There's no point in having a person to do what can be automated. And I think that's a really key principle to the design that I have, is how do we automate everything? How do we make it auto-scaling? How do we apply complex machine learning models to really understand what the players want?
Yeah, And that's the interesting part there, because using first principle thinking, when you break down company, when you dress down the company to its core, and then you say, okay, what are we aiming to do here? Like you're saying, we want to go from 1 billion transactions to 10 billion transactions. Okay, so then you realize, okay, by using first principle thinking, you know that to be able to scale, we have to automate. So this is in the white paper as well. You say whatever can be automated should be automated.
Yeah.
Can you? It's interesting to me as well. Can you go in a little bit more in that principle about whatever can be automated should be automated? And are there any exceptions to that rule? Because I would think that sometimes you also need that like human side to certain decisions.
So it's from an operational perspective. Then we can say, well, we can build and we'll call it an environment. So, it's kind of an environment in a box is generally how I would term it. So we bring all of the different technology together, which would form an aggregation engine and allow us to host games on it. And we can do that as one large system where everybody uses it, or we can break it down into a regulated environment. Or we can take it a step further and we can break it down to an operator level, or we can operate at a European level, or a continent level. So there's a number of different ways we can do it, or we can do a mixture of all of those. So the ability for us to spin up an environment and have it ready to provide the customers with the experience they want is absolutely key. But then as that starts to grow, then we want it to grow with the customers. So that's how we achieve our efficiency. And it will grow during the day if that's our busiest time. If we're on a different continent, then it grows at night rather than during the day. And we don't want to pay for a set of servers for a particular high watermark. Then we want to be able to do it, and that's all stuff which the industry's been doing for many years. Then I think we can bring that into the iGaming industry as well.
Interesting. And looking into kind of the future now in general, I know something as well that you talk a lot about is AI, machine learning. You mentioned Internet of Behavior here in general. I'm curious to just know on the AI and machine learning side of things, something you mentioned is to build, for example, recommendation engines which are similar to Netflix and Amazon, obviously, and other tech products. How come that Netflix have had this recommendation engine for the last 10 years and supposedly in the gaming industry there is no clear recommendation engines that is a function so far?
Yeah, so I think there are recommendation engines which exist in some of the operators, but I think it's how do we provide that in a good way that's a standards approach, and I think that it comes down to how do we collect the Internet of Behavior and how do we find the way that users interact with different games, and whether it's a particular theme or whether it's a megaways or whether it's just some people like it quite simple, then I think we can often see that someone goes from one game to another, and then if we segment those people out using big data, using AI and machine learning models, then we'll start to produce more and more interesting results. But I think there was something I was listening to the other day where it was people wanting to break out of algorithms. Okay. So it was more like a Spotify thing, that when you go on Spotify, then they decide what songs they think you would like to listen to. And so there was a challenge as to how do you discover new music when all of the algorithms just tell you it's the same music. And I think that's going to be key for us as well, is that we need to find the games that people like to switch from one game to another, and then we can throw in a few games that perhaps the algorithms don't come up with but we think someone might like, and we can see how they react and can see how they play. Interesting.
And so staying on the topic of AI and machine learning in general, is also something that just interests me in general. I try to follow as much as I can on a layman level, of course. But from your perspective, what are the what are like some of the major use cases for AI and machine learning? Do you think let's say in the next coming few years in general in tech, and also what use cases do you see for the iGaming industry in its entirety as well? What's your feeling on AI? Because it feels almost like AI is such a hype word right now, right? Everyone's AI. And there's this concept of AI winters and AI summers, that AI has existed since the 50s or 60s, right? And it's gone through hype cycles during those decades. And right now we are in a hype cycle again, where AI is being used everywhere. But it doesn't seem necessarily always that the progression is as quick as the perception of AI is. Just talk a little bit more, like just your opinions on AI and kind of use cases.
I think if we peel it back to AI in general, then I think AI is very one-dimensional at the moment, and I don't think it's got to that point where it can really take a bit of a step back and think about things in general. And so it's how do we use AI? But AI on its own is relatively rudimentary. Where AI potentially is going to start to show its value actually is in machine learning, which you can kind of argue, well, what's the difference between AI and machine learning? Whereas I think machine learning is really AI applied to a larger data set. So I think AI in general, then, it's a bit one-dimensional. And when you apply machine learning, then I think that's where it's going to be. That's where we're going to see the more interesting concepts. But again, I think that's where I talked about in the white paper, that just machine learning on its own, and again, that you could argue it's two-dimensional. But then when you use digital twins, and then you can apply concepts and you can tweak things, it's a bit like A/B testing that you have, then that's where I think the real power comes from it. So you apply the AI, machine learning, and the digital twins, then that's where you're going to see some really interesting innovation, I think, with the iGaming industry and with aggregation as well. And that's where the Internet of Behavior comes in. Then bringing them all together. Then again, if you look at how you use cloud products today, then a cloud product on its own, what value does it have? The value comes in how you do the system integration and bringing it all together. And so I think we'll always be in this winter-summer from an AI perspective, because we're trying to find ways of applying it, which is, I guess, an interesting segue then to be able to look at blockchain. And, obviously blockchain existed because of Bitcoin, but now blockchain is there with smart contracts. Then now it almost takes on a completely different dimension. And I think that's going to be the key for us to bring all that together. So, and again, the white paper here that we've written covers off both the Internet of Behavior, which arguably is, well, it's relatively simple, but it's capturing a huge amount of data. Doing machine learning, again, that's where people will come in and sort of generate algorithms based on the information they've got and apply that AI to it, and then run it in a digital twin. And then the aggregation platform itself is, how do we do it as cheaply and as efficiently as possible? And then if we can apply standard technologies like AI and machine learning along with blockchain from a transactional perspective, then that's where, again, it starts to take on a real life of its own. And so from my observations of working in aggregation businesses for over 10 years now, and then having come back into the iGaming industry, which is also partially an aggregation business, then that's the thing that really excites me, because again, we can just make the technology really transparent. So the aggregation then is just a commodity and it's what we do with the machine learning and digital twins that really drives the business value. That's what sets you apart, so to say, what you do how you can be creative to use the data that you are able to collect, so to say.
Super interesting. So we mentioned a couple of different concepts here: Internet of Behavior and the digital twin. And I'm curious on the digital twin side of things. So if I understand it correctly, what you're saying is that you can use the data that you have created, and then kind of applying machine learning to the past data, you can do A/B testing, but in a virtual environment, so to say.
Yes.
So instead of doing it in kind of doing A/B testing in a live environment, so say you can do that in a much kind of more rapid pace, kind of thing, and
Exactly.
and you can come to much more deeper insights on taking decisions like, for example, what is the optimal RTP, and so on and so forth. Can you talk a bit more, like how far can you develop this technology today, and do you expect there to be a point in the future where you can really create this like very rich environments that you can create this prediction from using machine learning?
Then, I mean, today there's ultimately, I think it comes down to how much it costs. Ironically, in that today it's absolutely possible, but it can be quite expensive to do because you're doing it at such scale. And it's only when you do it at scale that you can derive the true value from it. So I think it purely comes down to the cost implications that, you can do it multiple times a day, but it will cost you a fortune.
Okay.
And so we can peel it back. But I think one of the key really interesting points that we talked about there was changing the RTP. Yeah. Now, doing A/B testing with real players, then that has regulatory implications. So doing it in a digital twin way, again, that's where the value comes out. So how do you peel it back to first principles thinking if you can't do it at the right level of scale? And you also have the regulatory requirements to it, which some of my background is working within public sector in a very regulated world, but also working in businesses that have floated on the London Stock Exchange, where again, there's a huge amount of regulation there about proving the value of a business. So, and I think that's one of the real values that we can get out of that digital twin. Yeah,
it's very interesting. So is that, I mean, like I said, I'm a bit of a layman in this subject, but it's interesting to me. Would you even predict that like A/B testing in the future, is that always going, I mean, when it, let's make the assumption that creating these models will become more efficient, more cheaper, and so forth. Do you think that there's a point where doing A/B testing in a live environment in any sector will become irrelevant? That you kind of do A/B testing in a virtual setting?
Yeah, it's. I think it will just be you'll need to do a lot less.
Yeah.
So I think you can build a hypothesis. Then you can use machine learning, AI, to prove that hypothesis and maybe do some simple A/B testing. So you're iterating more rapidly, I think, than as an organization. And that's the thing which helps us accelerate the industry as well, and helps us either innovate, which we innovate faster than our competitors, which then means the operators want to engage better and engage more with us, which then builds the brand.
Yeah.
Or it is that we're helping the industry as a whole to come together. And one of the things that we touch upon there as well is the flock, which is how do we understand a player's journey across multiple game providers or across multiple operators, and how do we collaborate across the industry? And again, I think that we should be focusing on what gives the best experience to the player. And that's one of our key strategy points as an organization, is how do we focus on giving the player that premium experience?
Yes, very interesting. And also, just staying on the topic of the future in general, like what emerging technologies are you like most? I mean, you're a CTO with Neal. I mean, this is your life. I mean, emerging technologies. I mean, how you can't think of a more exciting topic, I think, if you're a CTO. Like, what emerging technologies are you most excited for? let's say, again, both when it comes to just where the world is heading in general for you personally, and then also what emerging technologies are most interesting to the iGaming industry?
Yeah. It's a relatively simple answer. And I think yes. Yeah, so I think first point for me is that we're going to see a lot of consolidation, and then we're going from a world where I think everything is built customized, to a commoditization. So how quickly we as an industry and as businesses can just make tech really transparent, I think that's what excites me. So then tech isn't seen as this this expense that we have. Tech is this true enabler. Then I think CTOs will become more business focused rather than technology focused, because the technology, as I say, becomes the easy bit.
Exactly, yeah.
Then I think the second answer to the question, at the moment, I think the blockchain and smart contracts, then I think that's something which I'm really, really intrigued by, in a similar way that I kind of felt when the iPhone came out in 2007 or whenever it was, that there was just okay, this just means now that we've developed this platform which has an app store, which then means that we can provide any degree of innovation. And that's something that I want to take into our platform, is bring it back to that first principles thinking, creating the platform which just looks at aggregation, games, mass model, and gamification, and then we can apply anything over that, and we can innovate for the next 10 years on that platform. And if we do that using commoditized applications or commoditized technology, such as blockchain, then we know that it's very reliable now, that it's stood the test of time, really, you could argue. It came out around about sort of 2008, I believe. Then now with Ethereum and smart contracts, then I just wonder about how much we can put in there to put in mass models, for example, within the smart contracts, so that we know that when something happens, then the players won.
Yeah. It's such an interesting comparison. You mentioned, when the iPhone was launched, what a paradigm shift it was, and what it meant with the App Store and so forth. And the general running theme of today is a little bit first principles. So
yes.
So the interesting thing with the iPhone is that I think the revolution with the iPhone was not that it was like a touchpad and that you could actually it wasn't the buttons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Although that obviously opened up to the possibility to create this platform where the innovation was not any longer in the hands of Apple. What you can use this device for. Like before the iPhone, when Nokia created a phone, you were delivered this phone and whatever content was on it, and what you see is what you get, and 100% of the innovation was in the hands of Nokia to create both the software and the hardware. Whereas on opening up the App Store and in combination with the touchpad and the other things, it opened up the world to innovate on this device.
Yes. Right.
So all the apps that you are using are not made by Apple, which was the case with Nokia previously. Yes. They are made by different companies who then spawn to become billion-euro companies eventually, right? So I think that's a great analogy in general using here, and that's what you were trying to create here. And that's, to some extent.
And that's what I want to create with our platform, is that I'm creating the iPhone, which is just the commoditized thing that, it's a bit like we've both got iPads here, and that we're both using them for a wide range of purposes, and it's only because there's been apps generated that you'd ever realize that you could do what you can do with an iPad or an iPhone. And I want to build that platform which effectively then is allowing other people, and those other people could be my organization, or it could be people outside of the organization, to innovate and produce games which are the likes we've never seen, and all of a sudden it starts to bring in a whole new generation of players, or it allows players to play differently, so a bit like Megaways did. And we know that recently there's Nick, wasn't it, that Big Time Gaming that sold his business to Evolution, and you look at that with 12 employees, 450 million, then the value that he created there is amazing because he licensed that technology. Then I think that there's and you look at the value of Apple and where they came from when they created that device, and all of a sudden they've just opened the world up. Then that's something that I'm really passionate about us creating as well, and I don't yet know how we'll do it, but I'm absolutely convinced if we stay on our trajectory with the first principles thinking, then we can really produce something quite interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And so you mentioned the transparency in tech and kind of that open up the possibility to not feel this like fear of tech or whatnot. So I have a question for you. So I guess there's two ways you can see this. Like blockchain is completely transparent, right? Like there's nothing that you cannot see what's happening on the blockchain. That's the power of the blockchain. It's decentralized. No one can change it. It is what it is, and you can track it openly. Whereas looking at AI, for example, in some way you could argue that AI is the opposite to transparency, because like neural networks, for example, are so advanced that a human being, no matter if you are the CTO of iSoftBet or any other company, it's impossible to understand how they come to the conclusion they come to. Do you see that as an issue as well when you start scaling AI, that you have to have that level of trust in the AI without knowing sometimes why it takes the decision? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I mean, my initial thought was that's why I think blockchain is really interesting. Yeah. And, I was researching blockchain the other day to see how much can it scale to. So, for me, I think that we should be using blockchain for all of those. And that's where it talks about that integration element. So I'm not talking about going out to a public blockchain provider. I'm talking about running a blockchain within an environment, which then it's just transaction after transaction after transaction. And whether that transaction is a bet or whether that transaction is, these are the symbols that for this spin, then it could be that we have different blockchains for each of those, and that's how we achieve the scale. Then, I still think there's the answers aren't going to come until you get your hands dirty with this stuff. But, it's a bit like if you were to ask Elon Musk how he was going to create the rockets, he didn't know. No. But he's got the help of people at NASA. NASA support him. He's obviously got the help of US presidents, and he knew that he could achieve this, but he didn't know how he was going to do it. And I guess in the same way, then I think that there's a huge amount of innovation that we can do within this industry. But I can't specify exactly how, but I think if we're using blockchain and we use blockchain for different purposes, and it's like you would scale a database, then you can have databases for transactional information and databases for reporting information, and they have different usage concepts, and one will scan, one just wants to write really quickly. So one's quite fragile, whereas one is ultra reliable. So you either, if you look at blockchain, it will write the transaction and then distribute it to lots of other systems, but it does it slowly. But you absolutely know that it's written. Yeah. Or you can go the other way where it's just written. It's written very quickly, but if you lose that transaction at that particular microsecond, then you may lose that financial transaction. Yeah. So it's always a trade-off between them. So, it's that time, cost, quality triangle that I always use, and I always say everything is three-dimensional. So if we go back to your question about AI and sort of what could go wrong, then I think AI doesn't have that concept of the 3 dimensions. AI just is check this KPI and that KPI, and if it goes beyond this, then do this. Yeah. Whereas the key is then we can look at it and think, hang on a second, it's doing that, but then it's actually a cold day, so more people are likely to be inside, so something's gone wrong. And actually we had an event the other day which meant that we released some new code that operated in a way to make the transactions slower. And now we're seeing the backing up of those transactions, then that's where I think you need the humans in order to really try and understand it. And using blockchain for that, I think, is a really interesting concept. But it's how we can scale blockchain, and I think that's going to be the key point.
Yeah, it feels, like listening to you speak about blockchain in a way, it's it's such early days for the blockchain still. And we're sitting here 2021, and we are making these predictions that in the future blockchain will kind of set some form of standard for how we do business in a more open way. And it almost reminds me of like how it must have been in like 1996 or something like this. And as the I don't know if the CTO was a thing back then, it probably was. Yeah, I mean, of course, 96 still computers, of course. But a CTO at that time would make the same argument for how we need to adapt our business for the internet. We don't know exactly how things are going to turn out with the internet, but we know that the world is going to be primarily, run through the internet in many different ways, and that's almost the feeling that I'm getting here a little bit.
Yes.
It's like 2.0 in some sense.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. So back in, I think it was around about 96, 97, then I was working for an organization then, and I was writing Perl scripts that effectively took a help desk system and that allowed our customers just to be able to go to our webpage, type in their ticket number, and to find the status. Now, it's something really simple, but I just knew that it was the right thing to do. And, the customers enjoyed that. But then I did that on my spare time. I did that because I was interested in it. And I guess it's like now when I'm looking at blockchain, then I do it because I think it's, we've got this. It's the right time, and we can talk about virtual reality and VR and games, but I just think that stuff didn't come together at the right time then. Whereas now we're seeing the internet, that was 96, and then we saw the iPhone, that was 2006-ish. Now we're 2021, then we can start to see how do you commoditize a transaction.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like every decade has its own kind of paradigm shift in technology in the last couple of decades, where like in the 90s it was the internet, in the 2000s it was the smartphone, and moving over to kind of wireless computing. I would make the argument like the 2010s is like social media in some sense, you could say.
Yes.
And now the 2020s is kind of like, maybe it is the blockchain and what's going to come out of that will be the defining kind of technology of the decade, so to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously now we're live.
Yeah.
And this can be played back to me in 10 years' time, of course. And I may be wrong, but I guess having seen some of these cycles, then that just feels like there's something different with blockchain and smart contracts that I believe that there's some real innovation that we can do in that space.
Can we break down the concepts a little bit as well, Neal? So we talk about the blockchain, there's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, and obviously other cryptos as well in the space. But I would say that these three expressions are the most relevant to me, at least. I mean, Bitcoin, obviously, it's all about moving money specifically on the blockchain. That's the only thing you can do with Bitcoin, right? And what the guys behind Ethereum realized is that what if we could transfer other things than just a cryptocurrency through the blockchain?
Yeah, so as I understand it, then I think I'm no expert on it, but I know that Bitcoin arrived, and with Bitcoin then we had blockchain to ensure that a transaction was done, and it was done reliably, and it was done without a central bank. So it's a medium for storing wealth. And then I think Ethereum kind of joined and created its own cryptocurrency. But the real game changer for me was when they realized that you could put a macro in the blockchain, that when certain events are met, then it's executed. So it might be, for instance, I'm a player I get 777, and therefore I win. Then it's just allowing you to put a macro within a blockchain.
Yeah, and that makes, because it is transparent, that means that the player never have to worry about there's an element of trust there, because they know that the ledger is open, obviously, so that if you got the 777s, you can go back and verify that in the blockchain yourself, right?
Yes.
Which is not possible with the traditional technology, and that's kind of the power in some way in the transferable into the iGaming industry using blockchain technology.
Yeah, there's going to be the openness. I think it's going to help with regulation, but I think the key for me is that rather than everybody writing their own proprietary application and spending X number of man years developing an application, now we can scrap those number of man years and we use those man years for producing a better product to the customers. That's where I think the game changer is. So then it just takes that away, and it's the same as when you're using cloud technologies now and you've got software as a service or APIs that you can call upon. So you can run an API which gives you a random number and we can integrate with that. We use a product which can help you with security. So you can have DDoS protection, whereas before DDoS protection was very expensive. And if you had DDoS protection, you needed to be on the internet, and that came with its own costs. Now you can do it relatively cheaply, and anybody can do it. So it's democratizing the approach. So it's I think you gave the example before when we were offline about the the small cryptocurrencies, the
NFTs.
No, the where you had some of your cryptos.
The CryptoPunks.
No, it was where you had some of your Bitcoin and then crypto exchanges.
Yes. Crypto exchanges.
Yes. So now we can democratize crypto exchanges. So I think that's it's all about how do we do things with less manual building. So whereas 10 years ago we needed to build an aggregation platform, we needed to build everything from scratch, and we need to code everything. Now we can just go out, take a load of standard components, integrate them together, and boom, we have an environment. Then we can scale it based on country, continent, regulator, and that's then how we build a business. Then we can focus on doing, again, to come back to the Internet of Behavior, make sure we automate it so it simplifies things, and we can invest our time in making things easier. And that's where I think blockchain is that really interesting concept that we have. And I know we've talked about NFTs as well, and I think that's the next really interesting thing is to NFTs is something which I've been thinking about recently, as to, like you mentioned before, the punks that we talked about, and it's how can you pay what they're currently asking for a pixelated image. But that in itself is again a really interesting concept outside of iGaming, but I think it can be applied in iGaming, and that if you want to have a premium experience, then there's the concept of fan tokens, and the concept of being a VIP at a casino, I suppose. So it's bringing that experience then into the online world.
Yeah, exactly. Can you break down a little bit? I mean, moving into the topic of NFTs, like you, Neal, I'm very, as you know, we've had some really interesting discussions on this before here. But can we break down a little bit the expressions here? So an NFT, the difference between an NFT and a cryptocurrency, or the US dollar for that matter, is the fact that an NFT is something that is unique and not transferable to something else on a 1-to-1 ratio. Let's say, like if I have $1 and you have $1 and we transfer them to each other, it doesn't make a difference. They are fungible, they are the same, right?
Yes.
Whereas an NFT can be, for example, a piece of art. There's no two pieces of art that are the same, right? Or whatever it may be. Or in the world of on digital art is the CryptoPunks, which is just super fascinating. I mean, the fact that there is this concept called CryptoPunks by a company that's called Larva Labs, I believe. And they created basically 10,000 avatars that are pixelated, pixelated little images. No two CryptoPunks are the same, but you can, the style of them are the same. So when you see one, you can kind of recognize that it's a CryptoPunk. And they created a marketplace, and people start transferring these. They start buying them, and they start transferring them on this marketplace. And out of the 10,000 CryptoPunks, the cheapest one on the marketplace, the cheapest one, is like $40,000 right now.
Yeah.
And the most expensive went for like $6 million or something like that. It's just absolutely fascinating. So then so there's a big NFT hype now. I think everyone has kind of heard NFTs, even if you don't know much about them. You kind of hear NFT a lot right now, and it's really worth to explore because it really challenges our understanding of what is it that gives something value. Because a CryptoPunk, I can buy a CryptoPunk for $40,000. And it's just a JPEG, and then you say, well, it's just a JPEG, then anyone can copy it, right? But it's the same thing as if you wear a Rolex, for example, on your watch. Like, why do you buy a Rolex? It's like, does it give you like some special indication of time? It's like, no, it will show you the same time as the $10 watch in the Donald Duck store that you buy, right?
So, and the $10 one will be more accurate.
Probably, yes. But what it gives you is like some form of status, right? So when you go into a meeting or a networking event, people see that you have a Rolex, and they give you credibility and status. So similarly, that is the essence of the CryptoPunks. So people buy a CryptoPunk, and then they use it as their avatar in Clubhouse, for example, that you come into our Clubhouse, and or for example on LinkedIn or Twitter. And when other users see that you have a CryptoPunk as your avatar, they give you credibility and status. And then you say, okay, well, why can't just anyone use a CryptoPunk? Yeah, well, you can wear a fake Rolex as well, and people do that, right?
Yes.
The difference here, I think, is that you can verify who is the owner of the CryptoPunk in 2 seconds because the ledger is public, right? So if I use a CryptoPunk, which I clearly can't afford, and then someone else is like, hold on a minute, like, and then he goes and searches for this CryptoPunk, and he sees that I am not the owner. Well, what happens then? I lose the credibility and the respect from that person and the respect from the community and so on and so forth. Just like you would do if someone realized that you have a fake Rolex. For example. So we have gone full circle here with the NFTs, where gaining respect and credibility is now something that is attainable on the internet, just like it is in real life when you walk into the networking event wearing a Rolex for that very purpose. I just found that just very interesting in general. I don't know what you think.
I mean, it's a big topic, and it's not necessarily technology related, but I do find it really interesting, and I think I'd probably take a slightly different angle on it, in that what we've got is a way of, it's a store of wealth, and people can go and buy, like you say, a non-genuine Rolex, and if you go and try and sell that, then I'll give you £100 for it, and then well, it's not really worth anything, and so well, throw it in the bin, not interested in it anymore. But if you buy a genuine Rolex, then you may have bought it 10 years ago, and I don't know, it might cost you $7,000, and then you go to sell it today, and you might be able to sell it for $13,000. So it's the store of wealth, I think, which is there. So I think from an NFT perspective, then you're right. I had a look at the punks, and I looked at them, and I went through and thought, well, if I was going to buy one, then can I find one with ginger hair?
Naturally.
and pale skin. So it was kind of bizarre that I would look at them, but you're right, and the value of them is just I don't quite understand. So I mean, I could probably rustle something up. I could probably find an app on my iPad, for example, that can create me one. But again, that doesn't matter because that's the same as having a fake Rolex.
Yeah.
But the point of it is that you've got this digital asset which has a signature, which is on a public blockchain, which people considers to be worth something and is willing to spend up to $6.757 million for this thing. Yeah. And it does make you think, well, I'm in my 40s now. We were kind of brought up to get a job and get a mortgage and to buy property, as that was seen the safe way of storing wealth. Or you invest in your pension and you invest in stocks and shares. And I know we talked briefly before, but when you look at a share, then a share it's something that you buy based on the future earning potential of a business and the ability for the management to run that business in an ethical way. In a way, that's what you're buying, and some people are willing to pay however much it is for an Apple share or the Facebook, FANGs as they call it. Then why is that any different to an NFT? And yes, we know that NFTs are then based on a cryptocurrency, whether it be Ethereum and Bitcoin being the two big ones. And they're very volatile. So until there's a stabilization of the price of a Bitcoin or a Ethereum coin, Ether coin, I think they're called, then is that a true store of wealth? But then actually that volatility may be the fact that someone put money into a Bitcoin 10 years ago and now they can afford to buy a punk based on the amount of profit that they've made, and it basically they're happy to give one Bitcoin because it didn't really cost them much back in the day. Yeah. Then I think it starts to get back to, and you talk about inflation, you can talk about quantitative easing, you talk about the economies, and now we're in the COVID era. Then how are we paying for all of the measures, certainly back in the UK, where they're supporting businesses and they're giving money and they're paying for the vaccines? Then where does that come from? Then, again, that could be sovereign debt, as we call it. Then you end up having inflation, and rather than holding a US dollar, then you want to hold gold because it's a rare material and there isn't much of it, and there isn't much more of it being found, versus Bitcoin, which again, there is only a finite number of Bitcoins. So it's the same as gold in that you might buy a portion of gold, but you don't ever put your hand on that gold bullion, or you can't afford that gold bullion because you only can buy a portion of it, which comes back again to the NFT, and that you can't buy a portion of a punk. No. You either own the digital signature on the blockchain or you don't. Yeah. And there's lots of examples of the NFTs in that there's someone who bought the New York Times columnist's article for $560,000. And you're like, well, it's an article that you can just copy and paste, so why would you want to own it? Jack Dorsey's tweet as well. There was something else I read about a Banksy piece of art that someone digitized and then destroyed the piece of art. And again, it kind of comes back to, but who are we to say, well, an NFT isn't the right way to look at it? And then if we tie that back now into iGaming, then if I wanted my own symbol within a game, and then that gives me satisfaction, then who are you to say that that's not a wrong way for me to spend my time and my money by seeing my face come up on a reel? It may tickle me pink. It may be something that I'm really excited about. And, that I quite like watches, and I get a lot of satisfaction from a mechanical thing. and so I think there's something there about that mechanics. But other people will say, no, I'm just going to go with with a £100 Casio, or I'm going to get a Swatch watch with a puppy dog on it. Then that's what they enjoy. Then it's the same with an NFT, isn't it? That if people are prepared to believe in that, and I think it's a cultural belief, then who are we to argue?
Yeah, exactly. But I can say, Neal, if there was a slot machine with your face at the head, I'll play it any day of the week. That's definitely for sure. So as a closing thoughts on the NFTs, I think as well, you can make the same argument just if you own art. So let's say that you own the Mona Lisa and you store it at your home as well.
I'd still be doing this job.
yeah. Good answer. Good answer. You'll still you are not the painter of that of the Mona Lisa. You just own it, and similarly when you say you buy the tweet of Jack Dorsey, you're not the author of that tweet, and you're like, why do you own it? But it's like the bragging rights, I'm the owner of this tweet, and same with art, like famous art as well. It's like I would you have a connection to it, and similarly you have a connection to tech in general, and this is a piece of history in some sense, and now you are the owner of that, so you are connected to it. And same thing on the art side of things. It's like you're connected to the art, you are really into to the artist and what he has done and created, and now you feel a connection to this piece of art that you now own, that he has put the doors on and whatever. So this is I've been thinking about NFTs a lot lately, and I was a bit undecided until recently, where kind of the pieces came together a little bit more for me. I feel where they just isn't going back to first principles again. Like they just in first principles owning something digitally and owning something in person. In real life, it's just the same thing. Basically, like the fundamentals are just the same, I think. Yeah. So that's why I believe that there's a future for NFTs. And then there might be corrections in the market. These prices are insane right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the NFTs are definitely here to stay. And this is the right time for us as an iGaming industry then to figure out what are the use cases here for the industry.
Yes.
We are speculating here now. Could it be that? For example, NetEnt signs a deal with Guns N' Roses, and you can win the symbols in the game, for example, as unique NFTs or something like that, and then they disappear from the game once you have won it, or now you own it, or it will be interesting to see how the industry innovates here. But I think the time is now to innovate, right?
Yes, and I think when you tie in NFTs. That can provide that real personalization, and I think that's what has real value. That's what people enjoy about whatever it is that they like to buy and spend their money on and do in their leisure time. Then it gives them a satisfaction, and if that means that they're playing a game where they've got skin in the game because they're putting their money in and they've got a chance of winning, and that kind of feeling, and then if you tie that back then into having the blockchain elements as well from a tech perspective, so you've got the NFTs in the blockchain, a lot of innovation, simplify the technology so it becomes kind of transparent, then we can spend more of our time innovating and creating that digital art or those digital assets. I think that's going to be key. Then I think that aggregation piece, and how do we make games faster? Then how do we reskin games? Then why don't we allow other people to create the games in the same way that we do with an iPad or iPhone? And then we provide the engine in the background. And that's where I think the recommendation engines will come really key as the number of games increases, and then the complexity increases. And again, I know I've gone on about it today, about the digital twin, about how you can see how people react to that. Then yeah, there's kind of that Elon Musk moment where it's like there's something out there.
Yeah.
There's something out there, and it's definitely going to be a great time for innovation in the industry. Then yeah, I think it's we'll see how it unfolds. But I think with smart contracts, blockchain, then world is our oyster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like right now, like the ideas that comes out of the boardrooms right now in this era, like just before kind of the blockchain of the revolution happens and stuff like that, is going to be the next, multi-millionaire euro ideas or companies that comes out of this, or the next BTG, or
Yes,
it's all happening now. I think it's and also it is a time where if you are a large organization now is the time to like be careful not to lose the eyes of the price, so to say.
Yes.
Because the dynamics are shifting very quickly here now.
Yeah.
Just like in the 90s, going from like analog to internet or whatever. Like where some businesses were left behind because they didn't transfer quick enough, right?
Yes. Yeah, which again, you can go back to the Nokia example when they didn't innovate quick enough. And I think that's if I do my job correctly, which I'm driven to do, is to make the technology the transparent and the easy bit, which then enables us to do the innovation in the product. And that's where I think it's going to be going to differentiate businesses that survive and businesses that don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Neal, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the podcast. You're obviously extremely well read, and it's just been super interesting to get to know you in general. And fascinating to hear kind of your thoughts on how the industry will develop, and just tech and blockchain and AI and machine learning in general. As a final question today, we spoke about before we started here, who would be like the 10 people you wanted to have at the dinner table? Maybe not all the 10, but can you mention 3 people that you would like to have at the dinner table if you could choose anyone in history, dead, alive, anyone?
Okay, so I think we'll go with Carl Jung.
Love it.
Naval Ravikant. And I think I'll throw in a wild card and I'll go with Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson. Why not? Yeah, we were saying before. Yeah, there has to be someone to entertain the table. That's for sure.
Yes. Yeah. It could be an interesting dinner. So
yeah. Brilliant, Neal. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, and wish you all the best, and wish all the viewers the best as well. It's been fantastic today, and take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been good to chat.